When was the last time you saw a flash of red on the pavement and actually felt jealous? The answer is probably rarely, and that silence tells you everything you need to know. For nearly a decade, the Christian Louboutin red bottom wasn't just a shoe. It was a currency. It was the ultimate membership card to the elite. If you saw that flash of red, you knew two things immediately. That person had money, and that person was willing to suffer to show it. It was in every rap lyric, on every red carpet, and on the wish list of every woman who wanted to be seen. But exclusivity is fragile. And once a status symbol is everywhere, it stops being special. Fashion shifted from agony to effortless. Status moved from logos to quiet luxury. And the shoe that defined a generation of glamour started to look tired. So here's today's question. Did the red bottom die because we finally chose comfort? Or did it die because trying hard became the ultimate fashion sin? To understand what happened to the red sole, we need to go back to where it all started. Christian Louboutin's story didn't begin in a traditional workshop. It started in the dark. Born in Paris in 1963, Louboutin was never interested in the practical side of life. He wasn't a good student, and he wasn't interested in structure. By his early teens, he became obsessed with the showgirls at the famous Folies Bergère, and by 16, he was showing up at the theater with drawings of shoes for the dancers. This is a crucial detail that often gets overlooked. He didn't learn about shoes by looking at women walking down the street to buy groceries. He learned about shoes by watching women on a stage. He watched dancers wearing massive, heavy headdresses, balancing on impossibly high heels, looking absolutely weightless. He realized something then that would define his entire career. The shoe wasn't there to help them walk. The shoe was there to change their posture, to arch the back, to lengthen the leg, to create a silhouette that wasn't human, but something closer to a bird of paradise. He famously said, "I hate the whole concept of comfort. It's like when people say, well, we're not really in love, but we're in a comfortable relationship. You're abandoning a lot of ideas when you are too into comfort." While other designers were trying to engineer a better walking shoe, Louboutin was trying to engineer desire. By the early 1990s, he had opened his own small boutique in Paris. But even then, he felt something was missing. The shoes were beautiful, yes. The shape was aggressive. The pitch was steep, but they lacked a soul. And then came the accident that built an empire. In 1993, Louboutin was sitting in his atelier, staring at a prototype of a shoe called the Pensée. It was inspired by Andy Warhol's flowers, colorful, pop art, vibrant. On paper, the concept worked, but when he looked at the actual sample sitting in front of him, something felt off. The drawing had energy, but the physical shoe looked heavy and lifeless. He turned it over in his hands, trying to understand what was killing the design. The problem was the sole. That thick, black, rubbery block was swallowing all the light. It looked too practical, too functional, the kind of shoe you'd wear to get somewhere, not the kind that would stop people in their tracks. That's when he noticed his assistant sitting nearby, painting her nails. Louboutin grabbed the bottle of nail polish, Chanel Red, and without a second thought painted the entire sole right there on his desk. The effect was immediate. The shoe looked completely different. It wasn't just another accessory anymore, it was keeping a secret. The red sole wasn't visible when you stood still. It only appeared when you walked away. A follow-me signal, flirtatious, dangerous, and completely impractical. In that moment, Christian Louboutin didn't just invent a trademark. He invented a psychological trigger. He realized that if he painted the soles red, he wasn't selling footwear. He was selling a do not disturb sign for the ground. He was telling women that they were too good to touch the pavement. And for the next 20 years, the world bought into that fantasy. But as we know, fantasies rarely survive the harsh light of morning. By the early 2000s, the red bottom wasn't just a fashion statement anymore. It had become a global obsession. While Jimmy Choo was conquering the red carpet with elegance and strappy sandals, Louboutin was doing something more aggressive. He was conquering the culture with architecture. He introduced the soquete and the pegale. These weren't just shoes. They were feats of engineering designed to distort the human foot into a vertical line. The pitch was nearly 120 millimeters. The toe box was notoriously narrow, and there was zero padding. Women famously described the sensation of wearing them as walking on razor blades. But, and this is the key to the brand's power, nobody cared. In fact, the pain was part of the allure. In the mid-2010s, beauty is pain wasn't a warning, it was a motto. Wearing Louboutins sent a very specific message to the world. I am willing to suffer to look this good. It was a display of discipline. It was performative. If you could walk through a gala or a nightclub in 120s without wincing, you were powerful. The brand exploded into the stratosphere. It became one of the most mentioned luxury shoe brands in hip-hop, appearing in countless lyrics alongside Gucci and Louis Vuitton. Cardi B's breakout hit, Bodak Yellow, immortalized the phrase, "These is bloody shoes," turning Louboutins into a hip-hop status symbol for a new generation. The demand was so intense that Louboutin had to fight to protect his invention. In 2011, he took Yves Saint Laurent to court in a landmark intellectual property battle. He wasn't fighting over a logo. He was fighting for the ownership of a color. He argued that when a shoe has a red sole, the public assumes it is a Louboutin, and therefore, nobody else should be allowed to use it. The ruling was more complex than a simple victory. The Second Circuit Court upheld Louboutin's trademark, but with a critical caveat. The red sole was only protected when it contrasted with the rest of the shoe. This meant that YSL could continue selling their monochromatic red shoes where the upper, heel, and sole were all the same red, without infringement. In other words, Louboutin owned the flash of red, but only when you could actually see the flash. It was a Pyrrhic victory, in some ways. They won the legal battle, but the limitations of the ruling foreshadowed the cultural challenges ahead. But there was another factor accelerating the decline: price accessibility. In the early 2000s, a pair of Louboutins cost between $500 and $800. By 2015, entry-level styles started at $700, with signature styles like the So Kate reaching to $1,200. Custom or embellished pairs could exceed $6,000. This created a strange paradox. The shoes were expensive enough to feel aspirational, but not so expensive that they were unattainable. With payment plans, credit cards, and the rise of resale platforms like Poshmark and The RealReal, a determined 22-year-old could save up for a pair. And many did. What was once a marker of old money became a rite of passage for new money. And in the world of luxury, that shift is fatal. There is a concept in luxury sociology called the trickle-down effect. A trend starts with the elite, moves to the celebrities, then the upper middle class, and, finally, the mass market. Usually, luxury brands try to stop the trickle before it hits the bottom. But Louboutin let it flow, but he wasn't being careless. Even in the early 2010s, while the red sole was still at its cultural peak, Louboutin had already started diversifying. He expanded into a completely different market: men. He realized that male consumers were just starting to get interested in peacocking. The rise of NBA fashion and the explosion of designer streetwear gave him an opening. He introduced the Lewis sneaker, a high top covered in aggressive metal spikes. The move was smart, but it fundamentally changed what the brand represented. Louboutin had always been about the elegance of a Parisian woman in heels. Now it was also about the aggression of a rock star in spikes. The metal studs became the male equivalent of the red sole: loud, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. For a few years, the strategy paid off. At one point, men's shoes accounted for nearly 30% of the business. But even as the men's line grew, the women's business, the foundation of the brand, was heading toward a crisis. By 2016, the red bottom had fallen into the trap of ubiquity. It became the default shoe for prom. It became the birthday shoe for every influencer in a bandage dress. The market was flooded with counterfeits that looked convincing from a distance. Canal Street in New York, DH Gate online, and Instagram sellers made near-perfect replicas available for $50 to $150. At its peak, some estimates suggested fake Louboutins outnumbered real ones by as much as 10 to 1. The fakes were so convincing that, unless you were holding the shoe in your hand, You couldn't tell the difference from across a room. For the aspirational client, this created a psychological crisis. If no one can tell if your $1,200 shoes are real, why suffer for them? So the exclusivity didn't just erode, it evaporated. It started to look expected. Seeing a flash of red didn't mean elite Parisienne anymore. Louboutin had become the Starbucks cup of luxury footwear. Undeniably famous, but no longer special. And then in 2021, something happened that marked the end of the brand's golden era. For 30 years, Louboutin had refused to sell. He famously said he wanted to answer to no one. But the pandemic changed the math. So, in a move that shocked the industry, Louboutin sold a 24% stake in his company to Exor, the investment holding company of the Agnelli family, the owners of Ferrari. The deal valued the Louboutin brand at $2.7 billion. On paper, it was a massive victory, but symbolically, it marked a transition. By bringing in the owners of Ferrari, Louboutin wasn't just a quirky designer in a workshop anymore. He was now an asset class. And as we learned with competitor Jimmy Choo, once you start answering to shareholders, the pressure to expand usually kills the cool factor. You can't be exclusive and ubiquitous at the same time. But the Exor deal wasn't the only challenge facing Louboutin. If you want to know what really killed the stiletto, look at the streets of 2024 and 2025. The culprit isn't a bad business deal or a private equity takeover. It's something far simpler: comfort. In the late 2010s, brands like Balenciaga and Vetements started pushing the ugly shoe trend: giant, chunky sneakers that looked orthopedic, Crocs on the runway, dad shoes. At first, the industry laughed, but then the pandemic hit. For 2 years, the entire world stopped wearing heels. We lived in sweatpants and slides. And when the world opened back up, a collective psychological shift had occurred. We looked at those beautiful, painful 120mm spikes sitting in our closets and thought, why? The definition of cool had flipped completely. In the 2010s, cool meant trying hard. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, impossible shoes. In the 2020s, cool became effortless. Quiet luxury, messy hair, no makeup, and a pair of flat loafers from brands like The Row or Loro Piana that prioritize quality over flash. But it wasn't just aesthetics. The cultural conversation around women and pain had fundamentally shifted. The 2010s saw the rise of body positivity, conversations about the male gaze, and a rejection of suffering for beauty. Wearing shoes that deformed your feet no longer felt empowering, it just felt painful. In this new landscape, the red bottom started to feel out of place. It felt loud and attention-seeking in a world that had moved toward understatement. The pain that used to signal status and discipline now looked like desperation. So, does this mean Christian Louboutin is over? Financially? No. The brand is massive. They have successfully diversified into men's sneakers, which are hugely popular, and their beauty line is a commercial success. But culturally, the era of the red bottom domination is finished. It has transitioned from a trend to a classic. It sits in the same category as the Hermes scarf or the pearls your grandmother gave you. It is respected. It is iconic. It will always be a part of history. But it is no longer the thing that drives the culture forward. The red sole is a relic of a specific time in history, a time of excess, performance, and of glorious, unapologetic pain. And perhaps that is okay. Fashion is cyclical. Maybe one day we will get bored of the beige sneakers and the sensible loafers. Maybe we will crave the drama again. Maybe we will want to be birds of paradise instead of pedestrians. But until that day comes, the red bottoms will likely stay where they are right now, sitting on the top shelf of the closet, beautiful, pristine, and silent. So I'm curious, what do you think about all this? If you've ever owned a pair, do you still reach for them? And if you haven't, does the red sole still catch your eye the way it used to? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and as always, see you in the next one.